from the Indiana Archives and Records Administration to talk about public records. Jim?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and if you have questions, Karen, I think, is it okay if I just take them during the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Fine.
So don't hesitate to ask if you have questions. I heard the previous speakers talking about how hot it was and how everyone's worn out from lunch, so don't hold back. First of all, I should probably start with what is IARA. The Indiana Archives and Records Administration, many of you may recall our previous name, for those of you that have been involved for a while. We used to be the Commission on Public Records, and roughly 4 years ago or so we changed our name. We have the same functions more or less, and the same rules basically apply, but I'm going to touch on some of the things that have changed over the last few years. On the presentation in the slide here, you can see a photo, and just so that you have some understanding of the scope of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, want to make sure there's something showing behind me here. As I see you looking on your sheet, I want to make sure there's really something behind me. So if you look very closely on the bottom left side of that screen, a picture, you can see a very small person. Well, that's really a full-size person to start off with. So this is the Record Center out at 30th Street here in Indianapolis, and we actually store 310,000 boxes out there, like this paper copy boxes, copy paper boxes, which we call cubic feet, but they're really bigger, slightly bigger than a cubic foot. They're about 1.2 cubic feet. So if we were to put just the Record Center's holdings end to end, right, all that paper upright in those boxes, we're talking about over 75 miles of documentation. The Record Center only stores state government records, and as I'm jumping around the PowerPoint slide here, but the State Archives, which is also in the same facility, it's about 8 miles east of the State Library. We went from the basement of this building in 2001 to 8 miles east of here, and one day hope to return to downtown. We're working with our good friends in the legislature to make that happen. But anyhow, the State Archives has another 300 and some odd million pages of documents, which is another 110,000 boxes. And in addition to that, we're sitting on 450 million images of microfilm. So all collective, if you were to print all that stuff out, we're talking somewhere around 1.5, you're all readers, 1.5 billion pages to read. Would that just not make your life? So that gives you some sense of the scale of what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis out there. Our office also deals with forms management, so all the state's forms go through our office, both electronic forms, web forms, paper forms. So your tax returns, all that stuff is reviewed by us to make sure it's complying with different state laws. We also have an imaging studio, which is our microfilming lab, our scanning lab. We also have the ability to take scanned images and convert them to microfilm, take paper and convert it to either one of those, and take microfilm and make it scanned. So those are the highlights. One of the things on the bottom of the slide is it says OCPR and SHRAB. Those are two different boards that work with our agency. I'll start with this first one. OCPR is the Oversight Committee on Public Records. So all retention schedules, including the retention schedule for public libraries, are approved by the Oversight Committee on Public Records. This is, I'm jumping way ahead in the presentation, but this is one of the changes that I mentioned has happened in the last few years. It used to be that each county's, which also has a local Oversight Committee on Public Records, each county approved retention schedules as well as the state. Now the state approves the retention schedule, and it goes into effect across the state for local units of government 30 days later. Okay, we did that because there's some counties that weren't meeting regularly. Their local commissions were not adopting schedules, or they're adopting parts of some schedules and not other schedules. And so in theory, if I was looking for whatever this document might be, and I was traveling to 92 counties, it could be that there was 92 different rules about how long this had to be kept, which made no sense. And so it became chaotic. So the legislature authorized this change. And so now, as I mentioned, the state works with local units of government to develop the schedule or revise the schedule. It gets adopted, and 30 days later it goes into effect. Okay. The other committee that's on there is the State Historic Records Advisory Board, which we call the SHRAB. It provides small federal grants to the state archives, and then we provide mini grants out to local units doing digitization projects or archival assessments. So historical societies are eligible. In theory, I guess a library would be also eligible, although you have at the moment, you have a much deeper pool with LSTA funds than we would have to provide to you. The SHRAB also is responsible for developing a report on historical records in the state, the conditions, setting priorities for how we make sure they're preserved and accessed. And so we work with all sorts of organizations, churches, historical societies, libraries, genealogical societies, and so forth, organizations that would have historical records across Indiana to make sure that they're preserved and accessible. So that's one of its big missions. The last thing I want to talk about on this slide is what we're actually going to spend the rest of the presentation largely talking about, which is records management. So there are two different units of our records management division. One takes care of all the state agencies, so the state library falls under that, and the other would be local units of government, which would include public libraries. So there's actually, over time, there's been two sets of retention schedules developed. One is for state government and the other is for local government. We'll largely focus on local government today, based on whom all you represent. So let's go from there. So in Indiana, under our statute, and really the statute reads, what is a public record? And I hesitate to use the word public record. You're all fairly sophisticated in this audience, but when I'm speaking generally to elected officials or others, they tend to confuse a public record with a record that is not confidential. And under Indiana law, a public record means a governmental record. So it could be confidential, it's still a public record, if you follow me. It simply is a definition of a governmental record under the law in Indiana. So, as I say, a government record, what is it? Well, under the law, it's any writing, paper, report, study, map, photography, card, tape recording, electronic media, blah, 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 blah. It's basically anything that you receive or create within your agency. So that's a lot of stuff, okay? So technically, all that would be a public record, a government record under Indiana statute. And that's a good starting place for us so that we understand the premise of what we're working with here. And so here's a whole laundry list of things. And as the world advances, we begin to get into born digital records, databases, audio files, social media, metadata, and indexes. All that stuff could be considered public records under the statute in Indiana. All right, so one of the things you might be interested in is, and in fact, if I had to guess, before you came here today, you were probably all thinking, gosh, I wonder how they develop retention schedules, right? Was that your conversation over lunch? Yeah? So it probably wasn't really, but you know, I can always dream. The way this generally works is there's four things that our staff looks at when we're writing a retention schedule. And they're the little pink bullets on here. What are the administrative or fiscal value of these records? Is there some reason to keep them from a fiscal standpoint, right? You need to make sure that you have to wait for the State Board of Accounts audit if it's a financial record. That's pretty obvious. So that's like at least 3 years. Or it may be a receipt record and there's a statute on the books that says that has to be kept for a certain amount of time. It's an expense record. There's a tort claim possibility. All those things play into the fiscal side of this. Then we have the legal value. Is it a contract that binds you to something? So how long do you have to keep that? The length of the contract plus 10 years. Is there public demand or interest? And so a great idea there would be maybe like marriage records out of the clerk's office, right? So they're permanent because people forever will want to find out my great-great-grandmother married so-and-so in 19, or if it's that far back, in 18 something, right? So there may be public demand or interest or historical value. So the county's first county commissioner's records or the charter of the largest city from 1813 or something, all that stuff has significant historical value. And so there's a determination on our part to keep that. So those are kind of the four key things that we look at there. If you were to learn anything today, probably the most important thing for you to learn would be that all of the stuff we're going to talk about, all the different lengths of time to keep things, it is not based on the format it's written in. Let me get my big prop out here. So if it's an electronic record, if it's on your phone or your hard drive, your computer, or if it's this piece of paper, if it's the same thing, right? If it's a piece of correspondence from one of your constituents in your library district, it doesn't matter how you got it. The retention is the same. Correspondence is 3 years. It doesn't matter if it's paper. It doesn't matter if it's electronic. The length of time to keep a contract, if it's electronic or paper, it doesn't matter. It's the same. If it's whatever it is, payroll records, the length of retention is always the same. The retention is based on the content of the information, not on the format of the materials. Okay? So it's all based around how long something should be kept. We don't write things because it's an email. You know, when I get the question, and if you think this through, it makes sense. If you get the question, well, how long do I have to keep my email? That's like saying, well, how long do I have to keep my paper, right? It depends what's on the paper. It depends what that information was. So you can't just say, oh, well, all my payroll records were in email, and so I just deleted them after 3 years. That's craziness, okay? I see winces and everything else, so I'm going to be really looking forward to the questions we get when we get to questions. But that's where we are. That's why the retention is really important, and it's not really based on format like electronic, paper, stone tablet, whatever. Okay? So these are some of the retention schedules we have developed already for local government. The general retention schedule, which we're about to talk about, which applies to all of you. There's a schedule for assessing officers in the local units of government, the auditor's office, the clerk's office, the coroner, the recorder, the treasurer. There's a part of a prosecutor's schedule. There's zoning, planning. This all has to do with land use. Then there's a public-private agreement, which probably doesn't affect anyone in here in any way. If you were to outsource the library, I can't imagine that happening, but if you were to outsource the library with a third party, and they actually ran the building and the library, then this is the requirements about what kind of records they have to make available to the public and how long those have to be kept, so that there's not a way to skirt public records laws. We recently, in the last 6 months, revised this public and charter school schedule, and there is a library component in there. If any, I don't know if are there still some schools and library mixes?
Yes.
Okay, so there's some library stuff related to schools in there. And then the newest schedule that we just composed is the Public Safety Agency schedule, which is all types of law enforcement combined. So everything from 911, jail, sheriff, police department, fire department, merit boards, all that stuff is in that schedule. All of these schedules, if you're interested, for those of you that are voracious readers, they're all available at schedules.iara.in.gov. So you can find any of the schedules there. So let's talk about the general retention schedule for a second, and we'll talk about some other schedules that exist after that. So the general retention schedule is divided into 5 categories. There's an administrative section, which is the section that deals with things that would be in particular interest to you, would be the correspondence piece. There's also a piece on minutes. So the board minutes, it requires that those are kept permanently when the Board of Trustees for the library meets. If someone takes the minutes via like tape recorder or something and then transcribes those into print and then they get signed at the next meeting, it explains that the cassette tape, let's go back to times when you used cassette tapes. If you have a cassette tape or whatever, that can be destroyed once the board approves the minutes. So it has to be retained until the minutes are officially approved by the governing body. So if it's a digital format, same thing happens, right? You can overwrite the digital media once the boards approve the minutes. Accounting and finance, as I mentioned earlier, contracts, receipts, expenses, all of that is in that section. Personnel records, there's a whole section on personnel dealing with applicants who apply for positions but don't get them, actual personnel records for people who are employed, how long those have to be kept. OSHA records are in there, things like that. All that's covered. The last 2 are really kind of the same kind of concept, publications and reports. These are not talking about books on the shelf or Time Magazine or something. These are, the library generates like an annual report on the Hancock County Public Library or something. That's what we're talking about here, and how long that has to be kept, all right? Same with audio, video, or general media. If the library were making videos for training purposes or something, it's dealing with those issues in that section of the general retention schedule. Okay? The general retention schedule was dramatically changed. I don't know why I'm looking at you, so you would know the
Well, I
answer.
was just thinking, I'm looking up in the left corner trying to figure out the date, but go ahead.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it was, well, I should look at that. It was probably changed 6 or 7 years ago dramatically. It used to be called I'm not going to remember this right, something about general county financial schedule or something. It was largely financial. And then we consolidated a whole bunch of things, borrowed from the state general retention schedule, and changed some of the time frames that some of the requirements are for this stuff. So there's been some big changes since we were last here speaking with you. So I would suggest you look at that, and we have copies with me. I don't know if you have copies for them also, but we have copies if you want to see a copy. And again, it's on that website, schedules.iara.in.gov. Yes.
How does an audio, video, and general media apply to, like, now we all have Facebook pages and we're doing YouTubes and, I mean, is all that fall under that? I mean, how do you deal with it? We might post things on Facebook with events and things that are happening at the library. I mean, all of our libraries have, we have a Facebook page.
Yes. So the question was, what about things that are being posted to social media and that the library posts to social media like Facebook about events and so forth? So the retention schedule actually stipulates how long those things should be kept. And I really think there's some variation on how that's handled. And I can't imagine if the library is deleting things out of Facebook anyhow. It's probably just sitting up there, right?
Yeah, probably is.
So it's probably not a challenge at the moment. I think the way that those read is that they can be deleted. They can be transferred to the archives or deleted if there's no interest in them. I believe that's how it reads. So I don't remember off the top of my head. I should explain this as part of this also. I should have said this earlier. This whole exercise of retention, besides looking at the fiscal value and the legal value and all this stuff, what we're trying to do is provide a balance. And the balance is the public's right to know, so access, right, versus the government being overburdened with retaining too much material. That's the balancing act that our office has to try and come up with. So in a case where you're posting stuff on social media about events, it's hard to believe that in 25 years, someone's going to say, oh, we should sue them, or they didn't have this event, or, the library is not really in the same space as the county auditor, if you know what I mean. So there's probably some latitude in how this will all flesh out. And it may even be at some point that we add to the library's retention schedule, the public library retention schedule, some differentiation, which I'll talk about in a second, so that you don't necessarily have to fall under the general retention rules for some of these issues. Does that make sense? So, yeah, I already remember we had a big conversation, and maybe it was with the state library schedule. I don't remember if it was the state library or the public libraries, about the collecting of materials. So when an agency collects materials, there needs to be one set of rules, but when a library is collecting manuscripts or books or whatever, it's a whole different thing and a whole different purpose than the government doing it. You're really doing it for public access, which is exactly what we're looking for. So sorry to give you such a long answer, but
No, that's okay. I mean, it's a new world for all of us, I think, with libraries on social media, and in fact, we have a person who's our social media guru.
Yes.
That's her job. Make sure things are being posted on our Facebook page, letting the public know what's going on, tracking the number of hits and what's popular, what's not popular. So it's a whole different world that we operate in now than we used to. So I was just curious how, my God, trying to retain all that stuff.
yeah, and you might Yes, and so there's been issues with government about people trying to alter their Facebook page or delete comments. So that's where some of this is coming from, and there's pushback on making sure that that kind of stuff doesn't happen. So that's part of what's going on here. Yes, sir.
John had a question about under the personnel. If I recall, is it general personnel files are to be retained for 75 years?
Parts of the personnel file are to be retained for 75 years, yes. And go ahead. You want to know why?
Rationale for that.
That's what I was just going to tell you. That's perfect. So the question is, how long do personnel files, generally, a person's personnel file has to be kept for 75 years. What's the reason for that length of time? The answer is, are you all in perf, right? Yeah. So, we're in PERS now. One of the challenges that we have found over time is that perf's records are not 100%. And what we find is, and maybe someone who's worked at your library has contacted you about challenges they're having. So I worked for the library for 5 years in 1967 to 1972. I then left, went to the private sector. I then came back and I worked for the state of Indiana at blah, 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 worked there for another 15 years. Then I retired. Well, I have 20 years of service, 5 with the library, 20 with the state. Perf says they can't find the 5 with the state. I'm sorry, with the county library or with the library. That's the problem. So if someone starts their career earning perf credits at some local unit of government or even with the state, leaves, comes back and works more or earns enough time to retire with state credit, with perf credit, that's the challenge we're facing. And so that's why you're required to keep that.
If you remember first agency, is that requirement still hold, or is it?
At this point, there's not an opt-out.
We're perf now, but and that has only been a very recent development.
Okay. It would be, you're welcome. So the question is, if you weren't always a perf entity and you more recently became one, can you opt in or out? What I would ask you to do is send us an email with that question so that we can study the legal ramifications and see if there's other things beyond the perf piece that are required for the 75-year retention for payroll or for personnel records.
Well, I'm going to keep all this stuff. I'm not going to.
No, but I think it's an interesting question. If anyone's interested in that, you're welcome to contact us. We'll look into it.
And
Okay.
I can attest to having first problem when I was with the city of Evansville, because maybe you're probably not my age bracket, but I've been around for a long time. And at one time, when you were first employed, you did not have to go into PERF. You had an option of being part of PERF or not being part of PERF. And then after you've been there for a year, if you stayed employed for a year, then you had to sign up for PERF. But PERF lost all the records of a whole group of us, myself included, that we had opted in from our first year of employment. They were not giving us credit
Yeah.
for that year, and that was a post-tax contribution, not a pre-tax contribution. So that when we retire, we don't have to pay taxes on that portion of PERF that we received in our retirement benefit. And we had to go through and dig through
Years of records.
of payroll records to provide PERF for that.
And there's a second piece, too, that this reminds me of, not to dwell on this too long, but the state of Indiana ended up in a lawsuit over personnel issues, and I think it was in the 60s and 70s. The state was paying 2 different rates to employees that were doing the same work, and I forget all the ramifications or the reasons. It had to do with when they started, maybe, or whether they were in union or non-union. There's some weird thing. So there was this big lawsuit, and this lawsuit was in the last 5 years. Okay, but it was back to records that were way back there. It had just been delayed. It had been filed, but it had been delayed and delayed and delayed. And so the state had to go back through all these years of records to identify which employees fell into which categories, and it cost millions just to go through the records. But because we had the records, it saved the state millions more because we could show what had happened. So that might also be playing into this. Okay, I saw another hand, I think, go up. Did I? No?
I've got several questions.
Okay.
I'm trying to find them here. I scrolled out of the...
It overflowed your
Yeah,
inbox,
it
did
did.
it?
It did.
Okay.
It really had to go to about minutes. Do board meeting minutes need to be accessible by the public? And that's a public access question.
Yep. So the answer to that question is yes.
And does the newspaper
But
count
let
as
me-
public access?
let me
Okay,
filter my question further, or expound upon my question further. By public access does not mean that it has to be posted on the internet, but public access means that the minutes of a public board, any board, must be made available to the public upon request, like any other public access request, like an APRA request, right? You following me? So they are absolutely public. There may be pieces of it which are confidential. If you're talking about personnel, if you're talking about legal thing, like there's a true legal issue, not like, oh, well, let's talk about suing someone. But there's some legal binding issue that's faced by the library board. Those can be redacted or excluded from the conversation, but the minutes are public. And the second part was newspaper.
yeah, does that count as public access? But I think generally libraries make the minutes available in their library.
And that is adequate. You do not have to print them. You don't have to put them online, unless, I don't know, the state library has adopted new standard. And, yeah, I mean that would be the only exception, is if the state library said there's a higher standard. Yeah.
Okay, then for the old I-9s that have exceeded the retention requirements of the federal government, does the disposal of them need to be approved by IARA?
Let's discuss destruction of records at the end. I have a whole, if we have enough time, I have a whole slide on that issue, so remind me.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
There's a process to go through. And so I'll just say this much. There's a process to go through. Anything that's on a retention schedule, there's one form to follow, and you file that form with the county clerk or recorder, whoever's serving as the secretary of the local county commission on public records. There's one in every county. That form, after it's reviewed by the county clerk or recorder, it gets sent to our office, and within 30 days, you can destroy that, whatever it is. If it's on a retention schedule, you can destroy it. That 30-day window is there so that if either the local county or the state sees something on that list that we think shouldn't be on the list, like you read something but may have misinterpreted what we think it was, like you think it should be destroyed, but we say, no, that's something else. That's why that review's there. If something is not on a retention schedule and you want to destroy it, then there's a different form you file, which is it's called a PR1, which is also the same form you would file if you wanted to transfer something, or more importantly for you, if some entity like the clerk wanted to transfer records to the library, they file this form. It's the same form either way. That gets reviewed by the local board, the local oversight committee, then gets sent to the state, and it sits at the state for up to 60 days. And the state then can say yes, no, transfer to the archives or whatever. Okay. On that one, we are now saying the county can't do anything until you get an approval or denial or an amendment from us, so that something actually gets transferred correctly or it gets destroyed correctly. The reason we want all this paperwork done, so there's a trail of what's being destroyed, is so that none of you can be held liable for destroying something and there's no paperwork to show it was destroyed. So if someone, and again, libraries aren't on the cutting edge of controversy generally, I hope, as far as, public records requests and corruption and stuff like that. Sorry, I flashed back to my days here and a corruption issue in another part of the state. But anyhow, generally that's true. And so that's why all those rules are in place. So it's to help protect you and to protect the citizens, to see that there was a trail and you actually went through a process and it was authorized and approved. Okay, so that's a really long answer to that question. Are we caught up with questions?
I think we're caught up. Someone asked about how do you retrieve the material, or will you be covering this later? And I asked that person, what material are you trying to retrieve? I'm not quite sure.
If the question is about, I'm assuming it's questions about I don't know. Let's see what the question is. Yeah. Okay. Anything at the archives or the record center we can retrieve through.
Correct. You can go get archived material at the archive.
Yeah, and see it there. You can't have it brought back to your home. You probably all know this because you're librarians. Most of you probably took an archives class. I hope you did. It's a great place to work too, by the way. The big difference, of course, is that anything in the archives stays at the archives. It's like your manuscripts. You don't pass them out. So you can't check out things from the archives, right? Okay. All right, moving on. This is like slide 4, and we're probably halfway done with the time, and we have 20 more slides to go. I better see how we are doing. Oh, okay. If you thought I was talking fast before, buckle down. So here's some other schedules. There's a bunch of schedules for cities and towns. In the second category, you see public libraries listed, so we can touch on that if you want. And then there's other resources that we have on our page. This is the people who serve on the local Public Records Commission. They're required to meet annually. So you've got the judge of the circuit court, the president of the county board of commissioners, the county auditor, the county clerk, the county recorder, the superintendent of schools for the school district for which the county seat is located. And if the county seat has multiple school districts, whichever one has the largest population, and then the clerk treasurer of the county seat is also on it. And all those people can attend in person or send a designee. Okay, so that's the gist of that. The county clerks a few years ago had a law passed that said that either the county clerk or the county recorder could be the secretary. The secretary is the one who kind of coordinates the meetings and takes in all the paperwork and deals with all the functions of the commission at the local level. Unfortunately, they never told the county recorders they were doing this to them. So the county clerks used to have that responsibility. Now one of them gets the responsibility, and so that's what this is all about. And as I said, they meet once a year. So let's move to the destruction of records. It may be illegal to destroy government records if you do not have them, if you destroy them in a non-retention schedule and you're not following the proper process. So we just talked about the process using those forms and everything. Also, it's against the law in Indiana for a public official, and you count as public officials, to mutilate, destroy, sell, loan, otherwise dispose of any government record except under retention schedule or with written consent. I should mention, since many libraries in the state serve as repositories or unofficial repositories for county government or local city governments or whatever, you may have some actual public records or government records in your facility that were transferred to you. The owner of all those records remains the entity that created them. Okay, it's important for you to know. So in theory, let's say the Avon Public Library receives all the official minutes of the town of Avon. If 8 years ago, if the town clerk treasurer today said, I want the minutes back, you are obligated to return them.
Okay. Not like the usual, you give it 2 minutes.
Correct. That's correct, yeah. Now, odds are they're not going to do it, but it could happen that someone requests them. There's only one exception to that under the law, and that is if they get transferred to the archives. The archives is the only other repository that is allowed to own the thing. So once it comes to the archives, it's there forever. If it goes to a library, a historical society, a genealogical society, it's still owned by that local unit of government until it's requested back. I would say the time, it's probably in the 12 plus years I've been here, maybe once or twice something's been requested back. I mean, it's like never happens. So, but in theory it could. That's why I think as the repository, as the holders of those records, really we call you the custodian of the records. You just need to know that that's a possibility. Okay? All right. I dread getting into this, but this is about electronic records. So let me start from the bottom of the slide and work my way up. When we're dealing with electronic records, the state archives and the records management unit, and really this is across the entire field, have strong concerns about electronic records they are absolutely awesome for access, right? You type in Jim Corridan and you can find all sorts of things in a database, a computer, whatever you're working on. However, from a preservation standpoint, it's disastrous. There needs to be all sorts of methods and systems, infrastructure in place to store and preserve electronic records, especially when you're talking about the archive side where there's a requirement to store something forever, because forever is a really long time. And as you all know, a hard drive is likely to crash probably within 10 years. CDs will degrade, flash drives will break. You know, I don't know of very many electronic systems that are permanent at this point, where we know the media will survive for long periods of time. So we have big concerns about that. And I'll talk about some things we're working to put in place right now. But so that's the premise that I want to start at, so that you all understand where we're headed here. And when I was working with the library, there's a huge issue also that I'm really concerned about that's your issue, not our issue. And that is, in the good old days, you were collecting manuscripts from people who fought in the Civil War. You know, here's my great-grandfather's World War I diary when he was serving in France or whatever, right? So how many of you are now collecting emails from prominent citizens? Exactly. And guess what? When that person passes away, the family's not saying, oh, well, let's copy all these to a CD and give it to the library. There's going to be this horrible blackout period from probably 1980 to I don't know how long, where we just don't know really the same level of detail about that personal family interaction because the emails are our letters, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind when you're working on manuscript issues. Okay. So now back to this ugliness. So permanent is a long, long time. It's forever. We are working to implement, or we are implementing at the very moment actually, a contract with Oracle that allows us to put up in a dark cloud, so not an active pulling down and pushing up all the time and storing that way, but putting up permanent records with redundancy that won't be accessed unless there's some kind of calamity. So I'm going to pick on you. So your library has some kind of fire, unfortunately, and there's a need to download, exactly, or a flood, which is still bad. There's a need to download the administrative records or the history, all the minutes from the library from the beginning of time, and they were all put in this cloud. The library's records are gone, right, because the building is flooded, burns, whatever. So that's when this would actually be used, where you download it. Otherwise, you're just putting stuff up all the time. And so we've negotiated this extremely excellent rate with with Oracle, 0.1 cent per gigabyte of storage per month. So we have, for about $25,000, we can store a petabyte, you're all gigabyte, megabyte, terabyte, petabyte of data up in the cloud with the way we've structured this. So anyhow, that's the direction we're going, because it's not like we can say, okay, nobody can use computers anymore. I don't think that's going to happen. But redundancy is really a key component, along with algorithms, to make sure that for our permanent records, we're going to make sure that they're not degrading, or when they degrade, then we know to copy this copy back over this copy, so that we have a complete set that's not in bad shape, because time is not working in our favor here. Okay? So that's the long answer to permanent records and what we're looking for here. What we are going to do, the state's records are going to be put in this thing, and we are allowing local records as a phase 2 to opt into this program. But there's going to be some small fee to cover the 1/10 of a penny per gigabyte times 12 months, blah, blah, all that stuff.
You're not concerned that you won't be able to read that at some future time? Because, I mean, right now, we're supposed to put everything on microfilm.
Right.
Because formats change and
Right.
technology changes. So are you not concerned that in the future, you won't be able to access it, or you'll be able to?
I am concerned about that, but that's why we're requiring the redundancy. So we're going to have it in multiple places, more than 50 miles apart from each other, to safeguard the likelihood that it's going to be accessible. I'm a huge fan of still using microfilm. However, some records are only created electronically. So what am I going to do, right? So my obligation in this job is to make sure that those records are available 1,000 years from now, or even 100 years from now, or really even 25 years from now. And so the only way I can really do that with electronic records is to keep them in multiple places in electronic format. That's where we are with our problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I'm still thinking of being able to retrieval of them, and then being able to read them. Right. You know, 25 years from now.
Yeah. So there's other pieces to this. This is a probably hour-and-a-half conversation. And that's fine. I'm not going to spend the hour and a half. But so one of the things we do is we format, neutralize them so that they're open sourced, if you follow me. So what the archives is doing is we're taking whatever, let's say you're sending me a file. So the file comes to the archives, and it's in WordPerfect. It's a good example, right? It's not quite archaic, but pretty close. So we will then convert it to OpenOffice. So we have your original copy, we have our OpenOffice copy, and we may have an Access copy, okay? All that stuff's going to go up in the cloud. So we have the original format, we have a format that we can play with in the future and keep manipulating so that in 10 years when Word's gone or OpenOffice is gone, something else, we can migrate that copy. That's what we're doing with the state's records.
Because I've been microfilming all the library's old general ledgers, which are permanent. You
Yep.
can never get rid of a
Yep.
general ledger.
Yep.
So we've got all these handwritten from years ago before computers, so we've been microfilming all these.
That's an
old
excellent
general
answer. That's an excellent answer. Yeah. Where microfilm has problems is one with computer generated, some computer generated stuff, definitely databases, and secondly with photography. So microfilm is a black and white image. It's not even a grayscale image. And so when you're trying to do photographic images in microfilm, it's a mess.
Right, because now I've got general ledgers that are electronic, and the only way I'm gonna be able to microfilm, I think, would be to print them out. You're talking
Right,
thousands and
right.
thousands of pages, and I don't wanna have to do that.
Right. And when you talk, let me just say this too. So as I say, I like microfilm because it's a fairly stable environment. We, to this day, are still requiring the State Department of Health to print out, so they have created all, I don't know if you know this, but all your birth, death, and marriage records are electronic now, okay? So we require them to print all that out, and then we have that microfilmed. So there's the electronic copy, there's a microfilm copy, and there's a paper copy. We do that because there are certain records that we believe are so important, they need to be in all those formats. Land records are another issue where we think it's really important. These all go directly to your rights as citizens, right? If you can't prove who you are or who you married or what you own, those are massive challenges.
No, I
And-
agree with you there, but I would think a general ledger of a library from 1920 is.
Right, it's not very valuable now. Yeah.
Invaluable piece of, document to have. And
Yeah.
right now, your retention rule says you can't destroy a general ledger report.
Right, unless you microfilm them.
Right.
Right.
unless you microfilm.
Right.
So we've been trying to get all of our OGL to microfilm.
Yeah. Yep.
You can't retire.
So, someone else's problem next year, not mine.
There you go.
I'm
There you
waiting
go.
at the end of the year, no matter what.
Okay. So that's kind of a nutshell the permanent records and where we are. Obviously, microfilm continues to be an acceptable answer for permanent records when it's usable. And the long term is the same situation. So anything that's more than 10 years with electronic records, we kind of lump together in that same category. When we talk about short-term records, generally 10 years or less, think about it, invoices. If you're getting paper invoices, you can digitize those and you don't have to keep the paper and you can keep just the electronic copy, okay? And then you can delete them after the 10 years is up, assuming that the State Board of Accounts has done your audit, which they should certainly have done an audit after 10 years. So that's those. The last category, the top category there, is transitory records. And so with transitory records, these are things, we talked about correspondence being 3-year retention. So think about your email coming in. If you're on the listservs, if you're just getting a listserv message, you can delete that message. If you sent that message, then you need to keep it, okay? Because you created the content. If you respond to that message, you should keep it because you've added to the message. It's no longer the same as the first one, okay?
And only 3 years, right?
3 years, that's right.
So I only need to worry about 3 years worth of my email before I retire.
Well, that's one piece. If it's correspondence. If it's contracts or stuff like that, it's a little
No,
different.
I mean, and I'm just talking about just email correspondence.
Yes, yes, yeah. So that's that piece. If you're talking to your spouse or significant other from work and you say, can you stop by and pick up the kids, or will you stop by and pick up McDonald's tonight for dinner or whatever, transitory. That's right. That's permanent. That's permanent. I'm just kidding. No, that's transitory. It can be instantly deleted, okay? Unsolicited emails from vendors, transitory, can be deleted. Now, if you have an RFP out and you're soliciting information, then you're in a different category. That's more correspondence than transitory. Karen and I go to lunch, and I send her a note, hey, thanks for lunch yesterday. or thanks for joining me at lunch, deleted. It doesn't have to be kept. Okay, it's not business related. Now, if in that same email I said, I'll follow up, or here's a copy of X that you requested, and it's work related, then that's a different category, right? But you kind of get the sense of what's transitory here. It's unrelated to work. It's not important. It can be deleted. Okay? Clear as mud? Good. All right, so those are those things. I'm going to blow past some of this. We were talking earlier about the challenges of digital content or digital media. So this particular slide talks about the fragility of media, the dependency. We didn't really get into this. I talked about the format, the item itself being a CD or a flash drive decaying, right? You also have issues of operating systems and the software itself. All of those things play into the concerns about how we're going to handle this over the long haul. And of course, again, the archives is focused on forever, which is a really long time to think about. Another huge issue, which isn't likely to affect the library so much, but it does affect government, is chain of custody issues. We want to make sure that it's, when the next slide talks about this, 2 slides from here, is it still authentic? Is there integrity with the record? Has it been tampered with? Was it modified? So, you could send an email in theory. I could send an email to Karen, and Karen could add the word not and forward it to somebody, add the word not and send it. And the word not is in front of whatever I said, which completely reversed what I was saying, right? But you can't tell that at all. So there's all these issues related to this. So again, that Oracle Cloud thing is going to be helpful to us, because then if something does get tampered with after it's created, there will be an original copy, in theory, still somewhere else. The other thing that we're very concerned about with this whole electronic records deal, which goes to some of the questions you were asking, is the usability of the records. How are you going to be able to access it? So, some of you, lots of you have worked on digitization projects, I'm sure. So one of the things that we often hear is, oh, well, you have 1.5 billion pages of records in the archives. Why don't you digitize that, right? Well, we could digitize the whole thing, theoretically, for maybe as cheap as 2 cents per page or something. We'd probably even get a better deal because it's so vast. We probably could drive the price down lower. Well, first of all, that's going to be like $15 million, which the state will never give us $15 million. But even assuming they did, you should all know, you probably do know, it's not the scanning of it, it's the metadata, it's the finding of the thing. And so even if each document, let's say on average is 10 pages, and I don't know that, I'm just making it up, that still means we're going to create, 150 million indexes, and those are probably 30, 40 cents each. Well, right there, you're dead in the water. That's going to kill you financially. So to this day, as we talk, and many of you may know, there's talk about building an archives building, where it's going to be. So I will occasionally get that question from either people in the budget agency or legislators. Oh, we'll just digitize all this. There's just no comprehension of what that means. I forgot I'm being taped, but anyhow, just ignore that part. So this whole issue of usability, it's easy to digitize stuff. It's easy to put stuff in the cloud. When we're putting this stuff in the cloud, one of the problems we're going to have is that the cloud flattens everything out. And so there will be a single folder and then material in it, but there won't be an entire folder structure. So we will have to have this super complicated chart or whatever, database that tells us your library's materials are in file 43577J, blah, 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 whatever. Or that particular folder name is in that place, which will make it a little bit more complicated to retrieve. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some other things. The SHRAB offers workshops. I don't know if the library offers this, but the State Archives offers a conservation workshop every year, and it's free. It's at the State Archives in our conservation lab. It's only open to about 16 people. So if you're interested, watch, and we'll send something out through ImPubLib or something, and you can all sign up if you'd like. And it also comes with a free lunch. Besides the free lunch, you also walk out of there with a box of conservation materials, like a big plastic tub of conservation materials that you can bring back to the library and use to fix things. It's mostly paper mending, a little bit of bindery, but anyhow, so that class is offered.
And the lunch has preservatives in
That's right. Yeah. I think we almost always get it from Jimmy John, so you'll have to check with them. The other classes, one's on archival basics, one's on electronic records. So if you're fascinated by the electronic records conversation, that class is probably 2.5 hours. You can learn a lot more about it. And this is kind of like the government records class, so you're all blessed and don't have to go to that one if you don't want to. Some other things you might be interested in. Do you have more questions yet?
No more questions.
Good, okay. The State Archives catalog. So have any of you ever looked at the State Archives catalog before? Don't raise your hand because you'd be lying. No one's seen it because it doesn't exist. It's not really true, but so the State Archives still has a card catalog. That's how cutting edge we are. I think the State Library got rid of theirs in the 90s maybe, or early 2000s. So we do have, our problem is we have like 4 card catalogs, 1 electronic system that we used for 3 years but nobody has access to, but all the records for those 3 years went in it. Then we have another system that started in like 2001 or 2004 forward. So we have now inventoried from scratch the entire holdings of the State Archives. And that whole thing is now down to it's either to the box level, so every box, cubic foot box, or even a manuscript box, and every book that we have in our collection is now in this catalog. The catalog will be online by the end of this month. It may be online within about 2 weeks. We're very close. We're starting to do testing. We have materials from local units of government, from the state, from all 3 branches, from all 3 levels, both levels. So it's pretty comprehensive. And there's stuff all the way back to territorial times. In fact, there's stuff before territorial times. 1786 is our oldest record. And then up to Governor Pence's records. I don't think we have anything from Governor Holcomb yet. So that's done. For those of you that remember going through Evergreen and barcoding, for those of you that are Evergreen libraries, so we're barcoding everything at the State Archives. That's a hideous process. So we've barely touched that, but we're working through that process. The State Archives was instrumental in providing to Family Search and Ancestry all sorts of vital record stuff. And so I think you may know this, I hope you know this, all the birth, marriage, and death records in Indiana have been digitized between the 2 of them, with exception of about a 3-year period from 59 to 61. There's a gap that we're working on trying to fix. So everything from about 1960 forward for marriage records is with Ancestry. All the other marriage records before then are with Family Search. Obviously, you all know Family Search is free, Ancestry costs money. Ancestry also took all of the state's birth and death records that the state collected, the State Vital Records Department, and those have all been digitized and are available on Ancestry. That was a massive project that the archives did with Ancestry. In that program, we changed the law so that death certificates are public now, basically. So the Supreme Court had already ruled that death certificates at the local level were public, but at the state were not, which was stupid. And so we got the law changed so that now they're just public, mostly. The Social Security number needs to be redacted and maybe the cause of death. But those are all up online on Ancestry. With the birth certificates, there's still a 75-year blackout period for birth certificates. So everything from 1941 back is public. Everything forward is still confidential. But all those, and the state didn't start collecting those, I think, until 1907 maybe. So from 1907 to 41 are all in Ancestry and available to the public.
So why are the other ones considered confidential? Because people still probably alive?
They're living, yes. And so there's identity theft challenges and fears. Yep.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. So that's that project. As part of our new catalog, there's the ILS in the library world, right? Integrated Library System. So there really isn't anything like that until now in the archives world. And there's a product called Axiom that we're using, which is going to be the catalog, the digital archives, patron services, so you can register your patrons. All that stuff is in one big package. And so we're getting a new digital archives through this product, which will probably roll out in like 3 more months. For those people that I suspect lots of people are coming to you doing research, so for Indiana-based materials, all the stuff on the slide here is all currently available in our collection online. So you can search from the library or from home and find all of this stuff. So if you go to digitalarchives.in.gov, you'll find military records, naturalization records, state institutions. We have mugshots of prisoners going back to 1870s in the state facilities. So sometimes those are the only pictures of someone's great-great-grandfather that exist. So we're proud to present those to you. We have the court's records and then other miscellaneous things like dissolved corporations, the old Negro and mulatto registers from the counties, public lands, all that stuff. So upcoming initiatives. I've mentioned already the new archives building coming someday soon, we hope. The governor sounds like he is in support of putting it in the next budget in 2 years. So hopefully that happens. This might be of interest to you. It will certainly be helpful if you could help spread the news when this is in place across the state. The state of Utah created a program that allows for a central portal to do public access requests, public records requests. So oftentimes people don't know how to do this or where to go. So what this allows, so we're going to do this in Indiana, that's where I'm headed. So what this allows is for someone to go to this portal, which will be managed by the Indiana Archives and Records Administration, and they want to make a public record request from the, Knox County Public Library. And so they go down, they find Knox County, they click on Knox County, here's all the governmental entities in Knox County, they click on the public library, they enter what their request is, they send submit, it gets sent to Emily Bunyan, or whoever's in charge of them there. That starts the clock. So, in theory, there's a 7-day time frame for you to respond, not necessarily with all the information, but at least with you receive the message. So it's a tracking mechanism, in part, and it allows public citizens a way to make sure that they know where to send their information. It's the first part of this that's going to be rolled out is the state agencies. And again, this is a phase 1, phase 2 thing. The second phase will be local units of government, which will be much more complicated because there's thousands of you. But one of the challenges we're having is that we have the state legislature is working to try and come up with crafting legislation to say that there can be research fees charged for public access requests at the local units by local units of government. And the state continues to block that. The governors, both the last 2 governors, Holcomb and Pence, have both vetoed that legislation. We're trying to get this in place so that we actually have metrics in place so that we can see where are there really problems, where is there abuse. Right now it's all anecdotal. And so with this system in place, we'll actually see, oh, look, the county clerks are getting hit, or the Department of Corrections is getting, is violating all sorts of rules or not following compliance or whatever. So we'll actually be able to see what's going on. The information put in this will be public unless it's flagged as confidential. So sometimes your public records request may include confidential information when you send it back. It may be something related to your individual information or whatever. But if it's not flagged confidential, that information will be accessible to the public also. So, well, if it's flagged confidential, it's
Someone doesn't flag it as confidential, right?
there's a lot of liability there. Yeah,
Liability.
yeah, yep. But that's coming to the state side in late 2017, probably launching in January of 2018, and then maybe the next year in 19 to the local units of government, or starting with the local units of government. So, but I think that'll be an important thing for the libraries. You can help with the public access component and help. I suspect people may ask you how to access governmental units, and this would be a way to get that done. The archives is offering for the first time in our current facility public tours and educational programs. And you all might be interested in this as well, because what we're doing here is we're creating from our original sources, our primary sources, exhibits that can both travel. We were thinking schools, but really the libraries would be a great place to have these things sitting. So imagine an exhibit, a big 24 feet long exhibit about the founders of Indiana in 1816, the delegates who started the state, or, I don't know, we could do weird things like genetics or eugenics. That might be a little serious for public libraries.
Reading the state flag, because
Yep.
on the state flag, we have your
Yep.
flag.
Yep. So there's all sorts of things that are in our collection that I know we're putting together for schools, but we could also have the public libraries utilize if you're looking for exhibits. So that's something you might want to think about. Lastly, on this slide, I think I'm going to end on time unless there's more questions. So this is great. Don't
Okay.
tell me yet, though. Don't tell me about that last question yet.
No question.
Okay. Another thing that would be helpful for all of you to help share with us, 1917 was World War I. You probably figured this out from my PowerPoint slide here. So this is the, centennial of World War I. And so the state has put together a commission or a committee to commemorate the World War I centennial. April 6th of 2017 was the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I for the United States. And interestingly, Indiana, this is so weird to me, Indiana, we do such a bad job of telling our own story of who we are as a people and the things we should be proud about, or at least famous for. So the first person to fire a shot in France as an American, the first U.S. forces to fire a weapon, was a guy named Alex Arch from South Bend, Indiana. And so on the day that he did that, we're going to be doing three things. We're going to have a ceremony in South Bend honoring him. We're going to have a ceremony at the War Memorial, which was built in commemoration to the veterans who fought in World War I. And we're going to, down in Vincennes, actually fire the same weapon that he shot off. It's a 75 millimeter French artillery piece. It's the only one in Indiana that still operates. So that's that thing. Another first, in Evansville on November 3rd of 2017, the first soldier to die in World War II, first American casualty in Europe, was a guy named James Bethel Gresham from Evansville. And so we're going to be having a ceremony in Evansville with the governor, the mayor of Evansville, and others commemorating his life and the fact that he sacrificed his life on that day. It's 100 years after he died. Is there anyone from like Jefferson County, Madison, Indiana here? So
They would be online.
of course they would. Thank you. I'm sure they are. So Indiana had one, there's a whole bunch more of these stories, but I won't tell all of them. But Indiana had one soldier who received the Medal of Honor or earned the Medal of Honor during World War I or after his service in World War I, and his name was Samuel Woodfill. And so later he would be recognized by General Pershing, the head of U.S. forces, who's the equivalent of Dwight D. Eisenhower in World War II. Pershing would recognize him as the greatest soldier he ever served with. And Pershing had him selected as one of the 3 members of the United States Army to carry the coffin and serve as a pallbearer of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington when they created that monument. So really interesting guy, a lot of interesting stories. He ends up dying in Vevey, Indiana, in Switzerland County. So watch for World War I stuff. We also have an exhibit that could travel for that. But there's events all across the state related to World War I. So I think that probably covers everything except questions from the audience.
There are no questions,
Excellent.
but we do have somebody as far as Switzerland County, they're telling me now. So,
Well, great. So last year for the bicentennial, the archives traveled across the state recognizing the 43 men who wrote the Constitution for Indiana back in 1816. And we went to the grave sites of the 38 people. Well, you were at one of those. We went to the grave sites of the 38 people who actually are buried in Indiana. And the most beautiful cemetery that I ever saw in this entire state is in a town called Mount Sterling in Switzerland County. And to get there, you go up into Mount Sterling has 3 buildings, so it's not really don't take offense, Switzerland County, but it's not really a place. And so you turn left on this road, and then you turn left again, and then you go down this hill, and you drive not across a creek, but through a creek. You actually are driving in the water across the creek to the other side onto a dirt gravel road, and then you pull up, and when we got there, it was absolutely peaceful. this town had spent a lot of money to restore the cemetery, and so it looked just like it would have looked in like 1850. And they had river stone that they pulled up and used to mark the poor people's graves that couldn't afford tombstones. I mean, and everything was just incredible. It's by a creek, so the creek's rippling, the wind's rustling the leaves, and at each of these ceremonies we had a moment of silence. And so it was perfectly still except for the leaves rustling from the wind, the creek rippling a bit, and then there was a cardinal tweeting in the background. Only thing you heard is the perfect Indiana ceremony, I'll tell you. So anyhow, with that, let me say thank you. Thank you for your time. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact our office.
Well, thank you, Jim. We still have announcements from the state library. I know we're running a little bit probably till after 4, but hopefully you can hang around for the announcements. How do I post it? It should be there.
Right. Okay, I just have a few announcements. I know some people are sneaking out, and that's fine. Traffic around here gets kind of crazy at 4 o'clock. So I'm Jen Clifton. I know I've met most of you. I've been here for 9 years next week, and I'm the new Library Development Office Director. So Stephen Schmidt retired back in April. So that's what I've been doing since then. So you can send me all of your CERCS concerns or anything that you would have contacted Steve for in the past. Go ahead and try me, and I'll see if I can get back to you. I'm also still serving as the LSTA consultant. So any LSTA questions can continue to come to me. And I will note that we've posted that vacancy on the careers.in.gov website. So if you know anyone who's interested in moving to the Indy area, that position is available. It'll be posted through June 22nd. We are also still awaiting our 2017 budget from IMLS. We're told that we will be receiving the full budget, but we just don't know how much it is. So if you applied for a 2017 LSTA grant and you haven't heard back from us yet, don't worry, we're still working on those. So a few things coming up this summer. Unfortunately, charges for Indiana Share will begin to be implemented on July 1st. So Class B and Class C public libraries will receive up to 250 share loans per year at no charge, and then after that it'll be $5 per loan, billed quarterly. And then Class A libraries, which I believe all of the Class A share libraries have moved to CERCS at this time, and we know that some requests may still have to go through share, so that's still a possibility. And out of standards libraries will also be charged $5 per loan through share, which previously was unavailable to them. So just watch out for that, and we'll be reviewing that quarterly to make sure that it's something that we're going to continue doing and needed. So another thing coming up this week, the Indiana Library and Historical Board is meeting on Friday right here in this room at 10 a.m. And they will be reviewing all of the waiver letters that you submitted and determining who's in and out of standards. So we'll be following up with all of you who may be wondering about that within the next 2 weeks, probably letting you know that you're in standards for 2016 or that you're out of standards and some kind of corrections needed. And of course, our office is always here to work with you on whatever those issues are. So another upcoming date this summer, the Info Express renewals are due on August 1st. So if you haven't sent those in to David Michael Hicks yet, please do that. And of course, payment will be due about a month later on August 31st. And then our next big workshop, I believe, is the New Directors Workshop, probably right here in this room on August 15th. So if you are a new director, know you are going to be having a new director, want to send someone in place of a director who will be beginning, just get in touch with Karen and I and make sure that we know to get you on the list. We'll automatically invite anyone who's new since the last workshop, but if you're interested, or in the past we've even opened it up to return directors, that's still a possibility.
Yes.
So that's all I have for updates. So thank you, and just let our office know if there's any way we can help you out this spring or summer.
All right.